Northeast. Today was Father's Day, and I set out toward my host home in Kittery, Maine. I would weather 10 miles of truck traffic, potholes, and rough asphalt to get out of Boston. I found an IHOP for some well-needed fuel after the sleepless night before. I got my usual platter of French toast, hash browns, eggs, and covered in gravy. However, this was the only time I didn't drink coffee with breakfast throughout the entire trip. The restaurant was super busy for Father's Day, and the waitress didn't have time to get me a drink. I also had a stomachache from the chocolate ball I'd eaten earlier, so it wasn't a total loss. I only had 60 miles to ride and followed the 1A route straight into New Hampshire. I could smell the ocean for almost the entire day. The houses on this beachfront route were like a dream. Giant 2- and 3-story square structures filled with windows and looking out into the water. They had porches and roofs that hang over the windows, creating shade. It's such a solid design, allowing the shaded breeze to flow through your windows and naturally cool the home, using Mother Nature as one big ol' efficient AC unit. You don't see many houses designed practically and intentionally in Kansas City. We are overrun with cookie-cutter concepts that are built quick and cheaply. I enjoyed the scenery and followed road signs closely to stay on my targeted trajectory. Exhaustion hit my body around dinner time, and I needed to fill my stomach before riding into the sunset. I saw a pizza restaurant and decided that would be adequate for my premium fuel needs. It was a local joint seemingly run by a family. The teenage girl in a hoodie looked at me funny as I ordered a vanilla Coke and meatball sub with a big smile on my face. I didn't take a long break, just enough to inhale some calories and make it to my host home before dark. I needed to catch up on time because the ship festival and lunch took longer than expected. I started riding parallel to the coast of the Atlantic and beside the beach. It was calming and deeply visceral. The last stretch to Kittery was about 20 miles right on the ocean. I came across a tourist town called Hampton Beach and realized that vacations were in full swing. Swaths of visitors on the beach, motels and inns in every direction. I saw playboys cruising on motorcycles and in exotic convertibles. They had boardwalk nooks filled with playlands, arcades, and casinos for adults. There were hot dog stands, fresh seafood restaurants, and cheap pizza. It was the classic East Coast tourist trap, and felt like a scene straight out of a movie. I had a wave of emotion overtake me during this beautiful moment of the trip. I reminisced about how I had ridden from one coast to the other, and was now truly experiencing the Atlantic coast for the first time in my life. It was the first time in the East I had stopped to accept the milestone of accomplishment, and I teared up a bit. Riding my bike along the ocean is a spiritual experience for my soul. There's something about the waves crashing over themselves, epic storms, and the cool breeze. It's beautiful, and being from the Midwest amplifies my appreciation for oceans. It just hits differently. I found an overlook and asked a couple walking by if they would take a picture of me with the water. I was halfway through the trip and getting close to finishing the East Coast. It's crazy to think that I had physically pedaled myself over 3,500 miles. I was proud of myself and hopeful for the next part of the journey, though I felt ready to start roughing it again soon. I'd been eating great food, given the gift of host homes, and spending money like crazy up the East Coast. Something itched inside of me to return to nature. The leather saddle I bought in Atlanta still saves my taint daily. In the next month or so, I'll need new tires again. But besides that, my bike and equipment are holding up well, My mind and body are jaded just as usual. Ibuprofen and coffee will continue to get me through each day, but I don't feel like my body is falling apart. In fact, I'm getting stronger just by consistently pushing that heavy-ass bike around. I pedaled into the sunset and finally made it to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There was a free concert on the water at a city park, and my host, Ned, had driven his boat across the state line to hang out and meet me. There was a channel separating the cities. I rode to the dock and found him hanging out in a small 6-person fishing boat. Ned was a spunky middle-aged guy and had lived in Maine for a long time. He owned a house with his wife where they raised their son and ran a small marketing business. He introduced me to his friend Jerry and another woman who was hanging out. We chilled in the boat for about an hour and listened to the soul band who was performing. After the concert, Ned threw my bike into the boat and shuttled us across the channel to dock in his backyard. It was a trip to dock up at his back door. The view from his backyard was amazing. The U.S.'s largest naval ship and submarine maintenance station was directly behind him. His home was 4 stories tall, and he rented 2 sections with an additional cabin in the back. Jerry rented the cabin, and this other guy, Kurt, rented a downstairs apartment. Kurt was a gym teacher, and every other year takes the summer off to ride a bike through a different country. He flies somewhere, buys a bike, sleeps in cheap hostels, then gives the bike away and flies home. Jerry was a consultant and retired from some kind of computer background. This group was fascinating, and they vibed on the same level as me. We discussed the idea of making time a priority over money and making money only to allow yourself to do what you love. We were all setting up our lives to be able to leave and experience the world. I talked to my friend Chris the day before, and he confirmed a place for me to stay with his friend Ian in Portland, Maine. That lined up nicely where I needed to make a hard western turn back across the country. Once Ian and I talked on the phone, he pawned me off on his other friend, Ian. This Ian went by his last name, Clough, so I will refer to him as such. Clough lived in Old Orchard Beach, and he assured me we would have a fun time when I got to town. The next morning, I rode on the coast about half the day before the road headed inland. Clough told me to try a seafood spot called the Lobster Shack in the town called Ongenquit. This place was a touristy coastal village with maritime antique shops and overpriced seafood. My 2 bucket list seafood items were clam chowder and fish and chips. I considered the lobster roll, but every restaurant charged a minimum of $20 for one. I knew there was no way a lobster roll was worth that kind of money when there are thousands of lobsters being fished every day. Opportunistic capitalists. Supply and demand aren't real. I promptly ate my clam chowder at the Lobster Shack, and it could have been better. I went to a restaurant next door and convinced them to let me get a half order of fish and chips for $12. It was the tiniest amount of food and not even that flavorful. I was thoroughly bummed on this inadequate coastal seafood experience. I should have splurged on the lobster. As I got to the outskirts of Old Orchard Beach, some random people at a hotel hollered at me louder than I'd ever heard someone holler before. I gave them a curious look and figured I might as well talk to them. The group was hanging out by the pool and seemed to have known each other. By their ages, I assumed they were all one big family. Each person asked me questions simultaneously, literally yelling as they spoke. It was off-putting and rude. They were astounded to hear how far I had ridden and couldn't stop congratulating me. One guy had just gotten out of the pool and was shivering while intensely talking inches from my face. They seemed curious about my story, but wouldn't listen to a complete sentence before talking over me again. Towards the end of our conversation, the dad said he wanted to get all the change out of his car and give it to me. I told him I didn't need any money, but he insisted. He gave me about $5 in coins and a couple of ones. Then, randomly, the pool maintenance guy showed up and gave me $5. I tried my best to wiggle out of the conversation and move on before they brought up any new topics. I thanked them for the cash and conversation. They seemed to feel good that they could help my dream come true. I arrived at Clough's place mid-afternoon and was immediately in love with his town. There was a pier with a cute little amusement park next to it. Clough was a few years older than I and also a video professional. He had thick black hair and spoke in a deep Downeaster accent. As soon as I lugged my bike bags up the steep wooden steps to his house, I asked if we could go check the pier out. I could tell he didn't like the thought of visiting the pier, but he was ready to fulfill my dreams. I explained I had all these quarters from the motel people and wanted to hit the arcade. I saw this first-person shooter game themed around the Transformers universe. It seemed challenging, but turned out to be crazy intense. It had surround sound, and you shot Transformers that swarmed around you in every direction. I get emotionally involved in video games and found anxiety drowning me in that moment. Still, it was a great way to cool off from a strange day of writing. I was grateful for Clough humoring my childish heart. We returned to the apartment after some rain rolled in to crash our afternoon. Ian had finally arrived from Portland and asked if I had a lobster roll yet. I told him I was convinced it was a ripoff. He was jokingly offended and told me, "You can't leave Maine without eating a lobster roll." This would be my duty as a newbie to the Northeast to eat one. He offered to pay, and that was all I needed to hear. I noticed right away that Ian was very sarcastic and hilarious. He and Clough together would be a good time as we figured out the rest of our night. I could also see why Ian and Chris were great friends, even after years separated from military service. We drove Clough's truck to this hotel with a snazzy club and restaurant. Ian gave him shit that we weren't walking, but I think he was sick of walking after visiting the pier with me. The restaurant had an enclosed porch with an ocean view. We ordered some drinks and a lobster roll, then chatted for a while. The more I hung out with these dudes, the more I liked them. Ian was good at throwing everyone under the bus, while Clough had a comeback for everything. The storm finally came in at full blast, unloading its fury, raining sheets as we watched the waves crash into the beach. Things can get sketchy fast when you're that close to the water during a storm, so we paid and bounced out. When we returned to the truck, Clough reminded Ian that he was right for bringing the truck after all. I was dying at their petty arguments. We returned to the apartment to wait out the rain, and I watched the boys play some FIFA on PS4. As the storm subsided, we decided to go back out and hit the town. They took me to this bar called The Whaler, and the bartender gave me a free drink. I watched Ian and Clough go at each other all night and was thoroughly entertained. Eventually, the number of people in the bar doubled, and it started to get rowdy. We weren't feeling that scene anymore. I told them I could go for more food, so we paid the tab and walked down the street to this joint that's open until 3 a.m. It had 3 walk-up counters, one for chicken, one for pizza, and one for fries. I grabbed a slice and Clough butted in on my transaction.
Why don't you tell this guy what you're doing, bro? You gotta play your cards, man.
I told the dude I was riding my bike around the country, and he wasn't very impressed, seemingly immune to anyone's excitement who came to his window. We walked towards the pier, and Ian asked if I had touched the ocean yet. I told him I hadn't, and I figured seeing it was enough. He told me, "No, man, you gotta touch it." I was cracking up because his accent made everything sound so much more animated. I was like, okay then, like, are we even allowed to go to the beach this late? Ian leaned over next to me and said in a deep voice,
Hey, I went to Harvard. I own the ocean. We can go on the ocean. I went to Harvard.
I was dying with laughter. We walked out to the tide, and it was freezing cold. I had sandals, but Ian was wearing Vans and soaked his feet to go into the water and take a picture of me touching it. What a pal. I left in the morning before Clough or Ian was awake and grabbed a coffee on the way out of town. Portland was only 15 miles away, and I got there around 9 a.m. It was a sleepy town. I didn't have enough time to explore the capital city, but I gave it a quick once-over and continued back into New Hampshire to the west. I originally planned to ride a southern route below the White Mountains into inland New Hampshire. Ned told me I needed to go through Portland, Maine, and take on the White Mountains instead of avoiding them. I took his word and rerouted northwest. This also allowed me to say I rode Portland to Portland. Bragging rights, you know? The roads were straight and traffic-free for most of the day, so I was thankful for the calm conditions. But, as it goes, the 2-lane road turned into long drawn-out climbs up to 45-mile-an-hour hill bomb descents. Back and forth, up and down. I tackled the landscape for a couple hours before spotting menacing black storm clouds rolling in. It was surreal because the sky was split perfectly in two on either side of the road. One side had perfect blue skies, and the other was about to unleash hell. I was waiting to see if I would luck out with only a tiny trickle. As the cloud completely covered the sun, I got my rain gear on and tightened my grip for the worst. It ended up raining for only 10 minutes, and the storm completely dissipated. While I was left sweating under my stupid jacket, the sun promptly shone its face back on me. I was heading to Conway, New Hampshire, and excited to stop for the night and camp. Conway is the beginning of the White Mountains. I got to a fork in the road that either followed the US 302, which is the route I wanted to take, or the Kankamangas Highway, which is a popular route for camping and things to visit. I pulled out the handy state map that I had recently acquired to see what camping was available. I called one place and they told me $40 for a primitive site, but possibly $55 depending on how many people were already there. No showers. I thanked the caller for the information, but almost passed out from hearing those outrageous prices. I kept riding and found some woods right off the highway. I bounced down the hill onto the other side of the metal barrier and locked my bike against a tree right at the entrance of the forest. I hiked into the trees to pitch my tent on a flat area. I set up camp as I was attacked by hundreds of mosquitoes. I felt comfy and safe in these woods. I woke up the next day around 5:30 a.m., trudging through the narrow trees and hiked my bike up the steep incline back to the highway. I rode up about a half a mile and found out there was a police station right there. I smiled and felt like I had pulled off a jewel heist. I was now in the town of North Conway, which is more touristy than regular Conway. I was able to stock up on supplies before hitting the mountains for a couple days, There were handfuls of hotels with marquees advertising their family packages. I saw about as many mini golf courses as hotels. There was one themed hotel that looked like a little town, and each suite was its own little store or fire station. It felt straight out of Branson, Missouri. I laughed to myself as I imagined what this place looked like in prime season. RVs taking up the parking lots, dads in sandals yelling at their kids, and an overwhelming hustle and bustle of vacationers trying to get their money's worth. I came across a beautiful pull-off with a wide landscape view of the mountainside, and I stopped for a photo. The white mountains stole my heart. I felt like I was in a Disney movie or something. The horizon was full of subtle snow-capped peaks, tall green forests, and a gentle morning haze. It's not a tall mountainscape like Colorado, so everything graduated into each other, and it had this perspective that hugged my heart. This rest area also had a working payphone, which I excitedly called my mom on. I laughed as no one would ever expect to get a phone call from a payphone in the mountains. I felt like Harry in Dumb and Dumber. New Hampshire and Maine were filled with dreamy landscapes and beautiful people. It's nice to see the ocean and lush green mountains so close to each other. For such a quick visit through these states, I viewed a country's worth of natural beauty. I experienced the scene straight out of a career mariner's life. I can understand how any writer from the Northeast Territory is nothing short of poetic when speaking of the sea or the forest. It would be proper to best describe this area of the country as quaint. There is a slow and easy pace, and even easier cool breeze. I felt a bit of a respite from breathing in the sea air and having a lot of good laughs with the charismatic souls I met. Kindred spirits gave me a lot of energy and brought out the best in me.